Crazy things can happen in the gaming world, and while I still don't think anything tops the PS3 Slim's debut in a Philippines marketplace, this one's still a bit nuts. AMD recently released source code to its FSR4 machine learning based upscaler to GitHub, and in its first submission made a somewhat critical mistake, namely including a different version of FSR4, one that works on older GPUs, not just RDNA 4. Using the INT8 machine learning instructions, as opposed to the FP8 rendition used in actual shipping FSR4, suddenly AMD's impressive upscaler gained a huge amount of extra utility. I mean, here it is running on Steam Deck in Remedy's control. Upscaling to 720p here in FSR4 balance mode, which gives us the leeway to use the same RT reflection settings used in the console versions of the game. Intriguing stuff, which got me thinking, could FSR4 INT8 find use on the consoles of today? Steam Deck runs it, as you can see, but in theory so does Xbox Series X and indeed S. We already know that a version of FSR4 will be coming to PlayStation 5 Professional too, but there's more to consider. AMD Z1 Extreme based handhelds can run it, but should you actually use it? This may give us some idea of how FSR4 may run on the new ROG Xbox Ally X. While talking about consoles though, it's almost certainly the case that PlayStation 5, the base model, not the Pro, does not support INT8 machine learning instructions. So for the lulz more than anything else, I thought I'd try the new FSR4 INT8 on AMD's Radeon RX 5700 XT, which, like PlayStation 5, has no ML support. So here's what happens at 1440p resolution. So yeah, unlike XeSS, there is no fallback for non-ML GPUs. Still an amusing diversion nonetheless. But first of all, gigantic caveats need to be attached to everything we're talking about today. Being a completely unofficial release, there is much we don't know. Is this anything like final code, or is it some kind of early version? We've lauded FSR4's quality in its FP8 version running on RDNA 4 graphics hardware, but does the INT8 version offer anything like the same quality? Well, let's tackle that straight away by looking at the initial cutscene from Horizon Forbidden West at 4K resolution. So yeah, we're looking at FSR4 here, 4K resolution as mentioned, running in performance mode, upscaling from 1080p. On the far right there, full fat FSR4 running on an RDNA 4 GPU, the 9070 XT. Clearly the cleanest upscale of the bunch by far. To its left is how INT8 FSR4 presents on a 7900 XTX. There are some noticeable differences here in terms of anti-aliasing quality, while temporal reprojection clearly has more artifacts. Next, further along on the left, RDNA 2 with a 23.9.1 driver, and that looks very similar to RDNA 3, perhaps a touch worse for some reason, but still in the same ballpark, clearly. Now, weirdly on the left is how RDNA 2 looks with the latest driver. It's a bit of a mess, to be honest. But this does seem to be a bug, as regressing to the 23.9.1 driver solves the problem. And if you don't want to do that, there are file swapping fixes out there. Regardless, everything you see from now on in the video is from that earlier driver when we're testing RDNA 2 GPUs. So what about the comparison then? Clearly INT8 isn't quite as good as FP8 then. Maybe that's down to it being a different version of the upscaler. Maybe we're looking at a lower quality fallback solution, similar to Intel's XeSS DP4A. Right now, without any guidance from AMD, it really is difficult to tell. But really, key to the discussion is this. What is the cost of using a prospective INT8 version of FSR4? RDNA 4 ML got a serious upgrade, so do prior AMD architectures have the horsepower to get a meaningful performance boost? First up, to get some kind of grip on FSR4 INT8, let's take a look at what we might assume is its intended purpose: to deliver superior upscaling to RDNA 3 class hardware. Again, the Horizon Forbidden West intro at 1440p resolution running on the RX 7700 XT at high settings with parallax occlusion maps on. And those settings will apply to every Horizon benchmark in this video, by the way. I'm not running on best of the best hardware here. I'm looking for a more mainstream take, closer to current console technology. 7700 XT here. kind of ballpark with PS5 Pro in terms of raster performance, which is what we're testing in this sequence primarily, with FSR4 INT8 on top. So based on the results seen here, FSR4 in balance mode at 1440p only offers an average 17.6% performance uplift over native resolution rendering, delivering results similar to Intel's lower quality XeSS DP4A path. I should point out that XeSS quality mode has a very similar internal resolution to FSR balanced here, hence this particular comparison. The existing FSR3 34% faster than native and 14% faster than FSR4. Typically, the higher the output resolution with upscaling, the better the performance uplift. So let's rerun that test at 4K. Here, FSR4 performance mode is 39% faster than native, while XeSS balanced, again, similar ballpark internal res, 45% faster than native. FSR3 though, it's rapid, a 69% improvement over native. That makes FSR3 at the same internal resolution 21% faster than FSR4. But yeah, FSR4 obviously looks better. So the question facing users is this: is the increased image quality over FSR3 worthwhile? And how does a lower resolution / more aggressive upscaling factor compare? These are questions where right now I'd subjectively say that yes, there are good arguments for ditching FSR3 in favour of FSR4, on RDNA 3 at least, but it's something we'd need to look at more robustly when we're looking at a final product. In the here and now, try it yourself, suck it and see. Let's put the difference in frame times between FSR3 and FSR4 into context, with frame rate targets typically seen on consoles. So the cost of FSR4 here, 2.8 milliseconds, in addition to whatever the frame time cost of FSR3 is, which is quite difficult to calculate, and in a world where a 60 FPS game has a 16.7 millisecond frame time budget, that's a huge chunk of extra processing time for upscaling alone, in a world where console developers can typically budget around 2 milliseconds for quality upscaling. And you can see that here in this visualization from Remedy's control on PS5 Pro, comparing the same scene with PSSR on and off. On the left, Remedy's internal upscaler, on the right, Sony's more expensive PSSR. In both cases, 1440p is upscaled to 4K. By comparing their frame rates and then converting them to frame time, we can see that the exact same content with PSSR running has a 1.6 millisecond deficit compared to Remedy's own solution, a world apart from the 2.8 milliseconds gulf seen with the 7700 XT comparing FSR4 to FSR3. But I digress, let's go back to the 7700 XT. At 1440p, the situation improves, just a 1.29 millisecond difference between FSR3 and FSR4. 7700 XT being better for 1440p gaming versus 4K, who would have thought it? But now, let's move into the fun zone with RDNA 2 testing. I'm going to test the FSR4 INT8 implementation here with the RX 6700 10GB. The closest equivalent RDNA 2 GPU to the PlayStation 5 graphics tech, though this is full RDNA 2 that supports INT8, unlike PS5. Now, there is no clear equivalent to the Xbox Series X GPU, which does have the full RDNA 2 feature set and could in theory run this technology. But as we've seen across 5 years of platform comparisons, performance is in the same overall ballpark. PS5 sometimes faster, sometimes slower than the Xbox console. We've seen some FSR2 games with a 4K output on current-gen consoles, and FSR3 has a similar computational cost. So let's see how FSR4 fits in using the Horizon bench. Again, high settings, parallax occlusion maps on. It's the slowest upscaler here, but you're still getting a 28% performance uplift in performance mode over native 4K rendering. That said, XeSS on the equivalent balance mode is 15% faster, while FSR3 29% to the better. In this visualization, we have native 4K on the left, native 1080p on the far right. 1080p is the base rendering resolution of the sequence before the upscale, though some elements of the image do need to be processed internally at 4K, full res. Even so, the frame time graph is telling. FSR3 gets you closer to the 1080p line, while FSR4 is a good chunk slower, closer to the 4K line. A 5.4 millisecond processing time between the two is telling. And remember, targeting 60 frames per second, the entire frame needs to complete its rendering in just 16.7 milliseconds. Moving over to 1440p, FSR4 continues to struggle on RDNA 2. XeSS with a broadly equivalent input resolution is 20% faster than native, while FSR is only 11% better. FSR3 a good 30% faster than FSR4. FSR3's lead over 4 is tighter though. The 29% at 4K drops down to 17% at 1440p, and there's an average 2.3 millisecond difference between the two upscalers. Still a lot of processing time to add, mind you, bearing in mind FSR3 will, of course, have its own computational hit. All of this is enough to make you think more carefully about weighing up the performance hit against the significant quality improvement. Would lowering FSR4 base resolution restore the performance and still look better? Again, we'll look at that when a final FSR4 INT8 build emerges, but here's a little look at something I cooked up in the meantime. It's our classic Alan Wake 2 benchmark scene, effectively running at the equivalent to the PlayStation 5 and Series X's performance mode. 1440p output, tweaked low settings, FSR4 performance mode on the left, FSR2 balance mode on the right. 720p native on the left, plays 847p on the right, a 38% increase in resolution for FSR2. Despite a mooted 2.3 milliseconds of render time added to the FSR4 upscale, the cut in resolution is enough to deliver a small 4% performance advantage. Is image quality better? Can't really tell in this scene, right? It's rather dark, but in a lighter area, FSR4 cleans up a great deal of the flicker, improves temporal coherence in foliage and power lines, and I guess it is the better image despite having 38% of additional resolution to upscale from. Food for thought. So let's move on to our next console implementations for FSR4. I guess consoles in inverted commas, but Valve's Steam Deck is the closest we're going to get in the PC space for now, and where we should expect the computational cost of the upscaler to be pretty high, but it may be offset to a certain extent by the fact that the rendering resolution we're using will be lower. Actually using FSR4 on the deck is super simple. Just install Decky and its OptiScaler plugin, plenty of guides out there to do that. Add a launch parameter to the game you want to use FSR4 in, and then basically you're good to go. We're benching exclusively at 720p here. I switched my benchmarking game of choice from Horizon Forbidden West to Cyberpunk 2077, as this game is more manageable for deck hardware. I'm using straight medium settings here in all tests, unless otherwise indicated. But things aren't looking exceptionally great for FSR4 here. With the game on medium settings and the deck set to 720p, FSR4 only delivers a 16% advantage over native resolution rendering, while XeSS ups that to 33%. FSR3 is best with a 44.6% lead over native, which translates to a remarkable 24-point advantage over FSR4. The real news here is that the additional processing time for using FSR4 over FSR3 averages out at 4.8 milliseconds. So that's 4.8 milliseconds on top of whatever the computational hit FSR3 has. Ouch. Okay, you might think FSR4 has better image quality, right? So let's drop down a setting or two and see how image quality looks across the various presets as we attempt to claw back performance. Well, sorry, but the cost of FSR4 is so significant that lowering quality mode to balanced only yields a 2.5 FPS advantage, around 7%. Lowering quality still further to performance mode increases frame rates by 5.5 FPS, a 14.5% boost compared to quality mode. All told, the best we can do here is a 25% lead over native resolution rendering by using FSR4 in performance mode, which is upscaling from just 25% of the output resolution. Crazy stuff. Still, it did mean I could play Control in balance mode FSR4 with what are essentially console equivalent settings in their quality modes, which is essentially a low/medium hybrid on PC with medium RT. Engage the deck's 30 FPS limiter here and you're good. Yes, there can be some performance drops, but hey, the most impactful ray tracing effect in Control is present and correct, and it looks great. But why choose FSR4? Well, let's look at this comparison. Ray tracing, extremely heavy, right? Especially on a Steam Deck. This scene here delivers around 21 FPS native. Control has its own upscaler, so dropping from 720p to 540p is a big win, delivering a 53% performance improvement. But FSR4 balanced is kind of like 423p, is comparable with 540p, and increases performance over native 720p by 85%, enabling us to absorb the hit of RT processing. Of course, we're injecting FSR4 here in place of DLSS, and Optiscaler can inject FSR3 instead. But weirdly, it's only 4% faster than FSR3 in this scenario. So FSR4 for the win, I guess? Not quite sure why FSR3 isn't a fair bit faster, but this is what the test came up with. One of the stated aims for FSR4 from AMD's perspective was to add good quality upscaling to its current range of mobile graphics, pretty much all based on RDNA 3.5, apart from some of the more bizarre entrants into the firm's Z2 lineup that are essentially respins of much older silicon. Still, Z1 Extreme in the Asus ROG Ally is RDNA 3.5, so let's dig in, returning to Cyberpunk 2077 and initially some strange results here at 720p resolution, again at medium settings with the Ally set to 30W TDP. Only FSR3 offers a reasonable bump with a 24% perf boost, dropping to 10.5% with XESS and a mere 7.7% with FSR4. FSR3 15% faster than FSR4. And the millisecond gap, a substantial 7.7 milliseconds. It's not much joy by using more aggressive upscaling either. You can get a 20-point boost to frame rate overall, but you need to drop to FSR4 performance mode to get it. This is not great, so I tried again at 1080p with more intriguing results at balance mode or equivalent in the case of XESS. FSR4 is still at the bottom of the pack with a 28% increase in performance, rising to 35.5% with XESS and 56% with FSR3, so that gives us a 4.5 millisecond processing time cost for the new AMD upscaler over the old. Man, FSR3 really is so fast by comparison, and that's the key area where I think FSR4 in its final form has to make some strides. Even FSR4 in performance mode can't catch up with FSR3 in balance mode here, but I'd say that the performance boosts here are pretty decent overall, and obviously there are image quality improvements, and certain games can look pretty awesome still, even in performance mode at 1080p. And here's one of them, as we look into practical uses for FSR4 then. I stayed with Cyberpunk 2077 and adjusted settings to FSR4 performance mode and chose the PC equivalent settings to the PS5 performance mode. And where Switch 2 had higher equivalent PC settings, volumetrics essentially, better suited to lower resolutions, I dialed those in instead. First of all, let's aim to target 30 frames per second with as close to a lock as we can get, and let's push through GPU-heavy environments from the Phantom Liberty expansion, then go for some needlessly provocative shootouts in the open world, a part of the game where the Switch 2 version tanks. I'm using FSR4 performance mode here, so effectively running a 1080p output upscaled from 960 by 540. Upscaling does tend to work well with Cyberpunk 2077. I think it's a genuinely handsome game playing out here that looks superb on the handheld screen. Performance-wise, it barely misses a beat. But the Ally has a 120Hz screen, opening the door to a 40fps performance mode if you like, but similar to Switch 2, we're just asking too much here and frame rates remain in the 30s. Ultra performance mode may well get you closer to that 40fps cap, but I thought I'd try something different and kick in FSR 3.1 frame generation, which does indeed work in concert with FSR4 upscaling. There are plus points and minus points. Can't say I was really bothered by the latency, which surprised me, and nor was I upset by frame generation artifacts. Something seemed a bit weird though, and to get the closest I could to a VRR experience, the Ally has a VRR screen remember, I turned off VSync and recaptured. You can see the problem here on the frame time graph, it's not consistent, and across a small number of frames there can be anything up to a 12 millisecond variance. That is not smooth. Interesting nonetheless. So FSR4, impressive visual quality, works well on RDNA 4 in its FPS incarnation, and the INT8 version looks very similar. Image quality differences may well be down to the fact that this is an entirely unofficial release of which we know very, very little. The fact of its existence, along with prior announcements from AMD about the need for a good quality upscaler for its mobile processors, suggests that the INT8 version will appear at some point. In fact, here's a quote I got from AMD when I asked them about it. We look forward to more updates to FSR4 this fall that will continue to improve gamers' experiences. Hardly confirmation of anything really, but maybe, just maybe, there is more to come. The only real challenge here is performance. FSR4 INT8 is heavy. In PC terms, that's not really a big deal though, right? It's competitive with DP4A XeSS and to my eye looks better. On RDNA 3 for sure, performance is generally fine, but RDNA 2, some of the performance uplifts can be questionable. So when we get to mobile hardware like Steam Deck, well, it can look nice, which in itself has value, especially in terms of anti-aliasing, but actual frame rate boosts may seem hardly worthwhile unless you can tease up some bespoke scenarios like the Control RT setup I showed you earlier. RDNA 3 handhelds. There's more promise here for sure, but the fact remains that FSR4 is still relatively intense and returns will vary probably quite dramatically on a title-by-title basis. It's clearly built as a DLSS competitor with the strongest utility in the desktop space. It would require some pretty wild levels of optimization to make it a lot faster without compromising image quality, a route that Nintendo had to go down with its more lightweight, tiny DLSS technology. I guess we already have that lightweight alternative on PC. It's called FSR3. It's the speculative Xbox testing that I found quite interesting though. As the Microsoft console SoC has full RDNA 2, I don't see any reason why it couldn't run FSR4. It's only one example, but Alan Wake 2 does kind of suggest that there may be scenarios where lowering input resolution can still deliver improved output image quality and maybe a small performance bump to boot. The chances of it becoming a Series X feature in multi-platform games are probably quite remote as it can't run on PlayStation 5. That said, SDK, GDK integration in preparation for next gen may see series console implementations happen anyway by default. Even so, the fact remains that developers have tight rendering budgets and FSR4 is still very, very heavy. We will see FSR4 coming to PlayStation 5 Pro as a new rendition of PSSR, and I'd guess that Sony and AMD will be looking to deliver the same kind of performance level as the existing version. That seems to be something in the region of 2.2 milliseconds compared to the same game running a more basic form of TAA, and may even be lower depending on what the original anti-aliaser was. The additional cost seems to be in the region of 1.6 milliseconds in this control visualization, for example. Before I sign off though, just one more thing, so to speak. The INT8 version of FSR4 is not AMD exclusive. No matter the vendor, if INT8 is supported, it should run. So just quickly, let's go back to the RX 7700 XT running Horizon Forbidden West and stack it up against a broadly equivalent Nvidia GPU, the 5060 Ti. This one's the 16 gig model, by the way. So at native 4K, 5060 Ti has an overall 5.6% advantage over the 7700 XT. But you'll also note that FSR4 performance mode results easily beat the Nvidia card. Basically, there's a 39% uplift on AMD versus a 23% boost on Nvidia. So this is an easy AMD win then. However, switch the Nvidia card to DLSS performance mode, the CNN model here, and 5060 Ti is streets ahead, 36% faster than FSR4. Transformer model will be a touch slower than the results seen here, and also on 40 series, and likely slower still on 30 and 20 series, but it's still pretty clear that FSR4 and Nvidia isn't using the tensor cores. Anyway, off-topic testing I guess, but man, this video turned out to be a lot longer than I thought it would be. Ultimately though, fascinating and exciting stuff, even in what may be nothing more than an early preview of the final FSR4 INT8 technology. But that's it, that's the video. Like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed it, and ring bells for instant notifications when we post new content. But really for us, it's all about the DF supporter program. Digital Foundry is now fully independent, so to support the work we do and the plans we have for the future, please go to patreon.com/digitalfoundry or visit store.digitalfoundry.net to examine our merchandising wares. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.